It started on a Tuesday, late, the kind of rain that makes the streetlights hum and the windows breathe. I set the kettle, slid the blinds to their usual third slat, and thumbed the chain lock twice. That satisfying metallic click that meant safety, routine. The boundaries between me and the world outside holding firm. My rug caught the drip from my coat. Ordinary. Except the doormat inside my door was turned backward, its rubber lip facing me as if it had come in on its own. The rain made a ticking sound somewhere it shouldn't. Not on the glass. Not in the sink. A patient, internal metronome that seemed to emanate from the ceiling above my couch, though when I looked up, I saw only pristine white plaster. I followed the noise room to room, palm grazing walls, cataloging textures, dry paint, cold plaster. My fingerprints left dull ovals in the fogged window. The apartment smelled like damp wool and something faintly metallic, like pennies held too long between teeth, mixed with the scent of wet earth that had no business being 3 floors up. On the turned mat I saw it, brass, dull with handling, tied with a thin red thread like a gift tag. A key, ground along one edge in a way that suggested teeth shaved to fit, burrs still clinging like metal grit. No manufacturer stamp, but the bow had that generic master profile I'd seen on building keys. The red thread wasn't cotton. Under the hallway light, it glinted like nylon, industrial grade, tied in a perfect bow that required patience and steady fingers to create. I didn't touch it at first. I crouched and studied. Tiny diagonal file marks, a notch pattern 1 step off from my deadbolt. Someone had tuned it close enough to scrape. I checked the chain lock with the careful attention I'd learned from too many true crime podcasts. The top screw was shiny and half proud of the plate, a crescent of raw metal where a driver had slipped. Threads showed a dust shadow, like it had been seated deeper before. I touched the bracket and felt the slightest wobble. A gloved hand, I thought, testing the give, learning the mechanism's tolerance. I tightened it with the small screwdriver I kept in the kitchen drawer. Clockwise, 2 careful turns, until the plate lay flat. I took a photo of the screw head orientation, documenting the ordinary before it wasn't. Outside, under the sodium lamp at the curb, a figure stood 2 car lengths away. The same spot from last week and the week before. Always the exact distance, as if the measurement mattered. Head tilted, no umbrella. The rain made a halo of their hood or maybe hair. They didn't move when I lifted the shade just enough to make a slit. They didn't try to hide they were watching. They just watched, as if the distance was a rule they respected, a professional courtesy. I picked up the key with a napkin, pressed clear packing tape across the bow to lift any prints, and set it on a saucer by the kettle. Its weight made a small ceramic click that sounded too loud in the quiet apartment. My kettle's blue LED pulsed in a slow living way, power dipping like breath. The bulbs in the kitchen dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. The building did that on windy nights, but the air was still. Only water moved, inside and out. I have routines that keep me safe. I moved the same curve around the table, always brushing the chair with my hip. I checked the window latch with 2 fingers, an upward push and a downward test. I fold the blinds to the 3rd slat because it hides the street but lets me see the sky. Ritual is safety. Predictability is armor. Tonight the rituals felt like lights on a runway someone else was already watching, cataloging, learning. I tried the brass key in the latch I never use, the lower lock that sticks from disuse. It slid in halfway and caught, teeth kissing just wrong. I turned it gently, feeling the metal protest. It scraped with that almost fit complaint that tells you the person who made it had access to a similar lock, not yours. Close enough to be a threat, not close enough to be mine. I pulled it out and held it level to the deadbolt. The spacing was off by a single shallow step. A practice run, I realized, a proof of concept. The ticking came back, more insistent now. I dragged a chair under the sound and held out a glass, one drop, then another. The smell sharpened, not mold, not clean city water, but something that reminded me of old pipes and copper pennies. I placed the glass on a plate to hear each impact, a slow, precise clock. I wiped my fingers on my jeans and noticed a smear, gray-blue, like fiber residue from coveralls or work uniforms. I didn't own anything that color. The phone on the counter lit without being touched. An alarm I didn't set slid upward across the black screen. 2:13 a.m.? I don't set alarms at night. They break the careful architecture of sleep I've built. The digits looked like a verdict, glowing with certainty. I turned it off. It came back. Same hour, same minute. The rain kept time with it, or I made the rain do that in my head. I placed the phone face down, but the vibration still found the wood of the counter. A small animal trapped in a drawer. I looked again through the slit in the blinds. The figure remained. 2 car lengths, head tilted at that listening angle. A bus passed and pushed water across them. They didn't flinch or step aside. My eye aligned with the peephole on instinct. The hallway lens showed only the dull cat's eye of the corridor light. But something about the angle felt wrong, as if someone had been standing close enough to fog the glass from the other side. Documentation became my anchor to sanity. I put a single hair across the door hinge, so I'd know if it opened. I dusted the knob lightly with graphite from a pencil, rubbing the point on a paper plate until the powder was fine, then tapping it with a makeup brush. The film lay even and gray, a forensic net, waiting to catch whoever came next. Back to the key. I looked for wear patterns at the bow. Scratches concentrated near 12 o'clock, as if turned with the wrist held high. The grip of someone who carries keys they use regularly, not someone who found this by accident. The red thread was cut clean at both ends, not frayed from pocket friction. Recently tied, recently placed. Whoever set it down wanted it found, not carried. I poured the water before the kettle could scream, the hush of steam sounding like the rain moving inside the room. I drank slowly and listened to my own breathing even out, my pulse stepping down from its alarmed rhythm. Outside, tires hissed on wet asphalt. Inside, my refrigerator clicked and settled into its nighttime cycle. I tightened the chain once more for the language of it, the small ritual of security. The screw held firm now. Something in me wanted to frame the moment as normal, explainable. People drop keys. Mats move when you drag wet coats inside. Power flickers during storms. People stand in rain because they live in neighborhoods, have routines, wait for rides that never come. I fed myself those gentle lies in a soft voice and let them sit beside the other voice, the careful one that inventories screws and distances and tells you the difference between coincidence and intention. I walked the apartment once more, noting sight lines and vulnerabilities, gaps under doors where light could leak, the vent above the stove with its dusty screen, the space under the bedroom door where shadows moved when someone passed in the hall. I put the saucer with the brass key on the nightstand where I could see it. I set my empty mug upside down on the threshold handle toward the hall, a small silent alarm that would fall if the door opened. I laid on my side, facing the door, the chain's metal curve a black question mark against the white wood. The rain softened to a steady sheet, and in its white noise, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, measured steps that paused outside my door, then continued down the hall with the patience of someone who had all night to wait. The phone glowed again through its face-down position, casting a rectangle of light on the ceiling. In that rectangle, a shadow passed slowly, as if something moved in front of the peephole on the other side. I didn't get up. I told myself it was the hall light cycling, told myself a lot of things in the patient tone you use with children afraid of the dark. My eyes closed, opened, closed again, each time landing on the brass key's red thread, a single drop of color in the gray. If the key fit any of my locks, someone else already knew the teeth, and tonight was just rehearsal. I breathed with the rain, counted to 30 in the way that calms the chest, and made a soft promise to wake at any sound that wasn't water. The phone hummed once more. 213 grew on the dark like a tide, and I didn't move. I let the hour pass through me as if I were a room and not a door, listening to the rain work the edges of my carefully constructed safety. Tomorrow I would have questions. Tonight I would simply survive the asking. I woke at 2:13 without setting an alarm. The phone lay silent and face down where I'd left it. But my body had learned the hour like a prayer I never meant to memorize. The brass key caught the hallway light seeping through my peephole, its red thread a thin line of accusation against the white saucer. My first conscious act was testing it again, sliding it into my deadbolt with the careful pressure of someone defusing a bomb. It entered 3/4 of the way before the teeth caught, close enough to scrape metal against metal, close enough to suggest someone had measured my lock's profile with precision tools and filed their copy by hand. The hair I'd placed across the door hinge hung intact, but when I checked the graphite dust on the knob, I found a partial print pressed into the powder. Not mine. The whorls were too wide, the ridge pattern too straight, showing the telltale compression marks of industrial gloves. Someone with leather thick enough to blur details but not eliminate them entirely had touched my door handle while I slept. I pressed clear tape over the print and lifted it carefully, holding the evidence to the morning light streaming through my blinds. In the hallway, the smell had changed overnight. Instead of the usual bleach and carpet cleaner, the air carried that wet copper scent from my apartment, stronger now, as if whatever was dripping inside had found its way into the building's circulation system. The fluorescent light above the elevator flickered in a distinct 4-beat pattern. On, off, and off. Pause, then repeat. Not the random stutter of failing ballast, but something too precise, too rhythmic to feel accidental. I recorded it on my phone, a small video clip of the pulsing light, another data point in my growing file of architectural anomalies. I walked the corridor with new attention to measurement, counting doors and windows, mapping the geometry I'd never questioned. From the elevator to my corner apartment, 6 doors, 2 windows, 43 steps. But yesterday, walking the same distance from outside and looking up at the 3rd floor, I'd counted 6 windows and 42 paces. The math didn't reconcile. Buildings don't lie about their bones, but someone had made this one flexible with the truth. 1 window was missing from the internal count, or one extra existed on the exterior. A discrepancy that suggested hidden spaces carved from what should have been empty air. Near the service closet, I found what shouldn't exist. A seventh door, unmarked, painted the same institutional beige as the walls, but with paint slightly newer than the surrounding surfaces. No number, no nameplate, just a standard commercial lock and a gap at the bottom that exhaled cold air like a mouth. I knelt and pressed my ear to the wood, listening to silence that wasn't empty but holding its breath. The brass key from my doormat slid into this lock completely, turned with a smooth click, and engaged the mechanism like it had been cut specifically for this purpose. The door didn't open, but the tumblers moved with the satisfaction of a key finding its intended home. Something white and rectangular lay on my apartment floor when I returned. A Polaroid photograph, its edges damp and slightly curled from moisture exposure. The image made my chest tighten. A close-up of my own peephole taken from the hallway side. The fish-eye lens stared back like a black eye, reflecting the distorted interior of my apartment. In the bottom corner, a timestamp, smudged but legible. 2:13. Not just an alarm on my phone anymore, but a reference point, a ritual marker documenting someone's presence at my door while I slept. The janitor appeared at the corridor's far end, his cart squeaking in that same 4-beat rhythm as the flickering light. Mr. Henderson had always been a man of few words, usually just a nod and the rattle of his impressive key ring. But today he stopped when he saw me, his smile wide and showing only gums, no teeth, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning 317, he said, his voice carrying that professional friendliness service worker's perfect. I hadn't mentioned my apartment number. I hadn't even greeted him. He just knew, the way someone knows a thing they've written down and memorized. His gaze lingered on the brass key still in my hand, then shifted to my door with the familiarity of someone who'd studied both. His key ring clinked when he moved, heavy with brass and steel, and one key caught the light with the same dull patina as mine. The same red thread, tied in the same careful bow. When I asked about the unmarked door, he glanced at it like he was seeing it for the first time, then shrugged with practiced confusion. Storage, maybe? I just cleaned the halls. But his keys told a different story, their weight and variety suggesting access to spaces that didn't appear on any building directory. I tested the intercom, intending to call the building manager about the architectural inconsistencies. Static filled the speaker, not random white noise, but a looping pattern. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats, pause. The same rhythm as Henderson's cartwheels, the same timing as the mysterious drip in my ceiling. When I mentioned this to Henderson later, his keys stopped their constant rattling. The static cleared immediately, dial tone buzzing to life as if someone had flipped a switch I couldn't see. Documentation became my anchor against the building's shifting reality. I photographed the screw heads on my door frame, noting their precise orientation. I measured distances with my phone's app, creating a digital map of inconsistencies. I collected fiber residue from my fingertips, still that gray-blue color of work uniforms, industrial cotton designed to resist stains and wear. Under magnification, the weave showed the tight construction of coveralls, the kind maintenance workers wore when handling keys all day. The drip above my couch had accelerated overnight. What started as occasional drops now came in steady intervals, each one carrying that metallic smell deeper into my apartment's air. I climbed on a chair and pressed my ear to the ceiling. above the plaster, something moved with deliberate intention. Not pipes settling or building expansion, but footsteps crossing a floor that shouldn't exist according to the building's posted blueprints. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just coordinates that, when plugged into a map application, showed my exact location down to my specific apartment. The timestamp read 2:13, but my phone's clock displayed 11:47 p.m. Someone was operating on a different schedule, marking time in hours that didn't align with the rest of the world, counting beats in a rhythm only they could hear. I wedged a chair under my door handle and checked the chain lock one final time. The screw I'd tightened held firm, but tiny metal shavings around the bracket caught the light. Bright and fresh, evidence of recent testing with precision tools. Someone had been measuring the gap between secure and compromised, learning the exact tolerances of my carefully constructed safety. At 3:17 a.m., keys turned in the hallway with patient precision. My chain lifted once, settled, then lifted again as if being tested for weight and resistance. No footsteps approached or retreated. Just the gentle, methodical sound of someone who knew exactly which keys opened which doors, working their way through a building that kept more secrets than it revealed. By morning, my doormat had rotated back to its normal position, rubber lip facing outward, neat as a correction made by invisible hands that respected the proper order of things. I woke at 2:13 without setting an alarm, my body now synchronized to someone else's schedule. The metallic drip above my couch had evolved overnight from occasional drops to a deliberate pattern. 3 drops, pause, 2 drops, pause, repeat. The ceramic bowl I'd placed beneath caught liquid that wasn't water, something darker, oily, carrying that copper penny smell concentrated enough to taste. When I touched a drop with a cotton swab, it left a gray-blue stain matching the uniform fibers I'd been finding throughout my apartment. I moved into forensic procedure because documentation anchored me against the building's shifting reality. Fresh graphite powder went on every surface that mattered. Doorknob, chain bracket, window latch, the mysterious brass key. Baby powder scattered along my threshold created an invisible tripwire, ready to capture footprint evidence. The micro recorder under my bed blinked its red LED like a mechanical heartbeat, waiting to document whatever moved through my space while I pretended to sleep. The object waited where no object should exist, centered in my kitchen sink like an offering. A small spiral notebook, damp but legible, its cardboard cover puckled from moisture. I photographed it in place before touching it, documenting exact position and orientation. The pages contained my life in block letters. Kettle on 11:20 p.m., water boils 4 minutes, pours before whistle. Blinds folded to third slat, upward motion, 2-finger latch test follows. Chain lock checked twice. Click, pause, second click for confirmation. Worse were the movement patterns cataloged with scientific precision. Same curve around table. Hip brushes chair at 23 inches. Bathroom threshold crossed right foot first, left hand trailing wall. Someone had measured not just my actions, but the unconscious choreography of my private life, mapping prey behavior with predator patience. Margins contained timing notations, all referencing 2:13, with small check marks as if a supervisor had verified the observations. The neighbor's humming started on cue, those same 5 notes drifting through our shared wall. Mrs. Chen had lived quietly next door for 3 years, but recently she'd begun this musical routine at specific times, always when I moved through kitchen or bathroom areas. Today I pressed a glass to the wall and confirmed the melody followed that familiar four-beat pattern, synchronized with the flickering lights and Henderson's cartwheels. She was another instrument in an orchestra I was only beginning to understand. When she passed my door, her shadow lingered at the peephole, not casual hallway movement, but deliberate positioning where the fisheye lens would capture her silhouette. Her eye appeared at the glass, not looking through but studying the peephole itself, examining angles and field of view with technical interest. She knew I was watching her watch me, and she performed anyway. The message was part of the method. My breaker box betrayed me at exactly 8:30 p.m. Every switch remained in correct position, no overload, no storm surge to explain the sudden darkness. The main breaker had tripped without cause, cutting power while other apartments glowed normally through their windows. In the basement, Henderson adjusted something near the electrical panel, his usually rattling keyring silent, movements practiced and confident. "Power surge," he explained without looking up. "Old wiring, you know." The camera I'd positioned to monitor my door died with a hard electronic click when power returned. Not gradual battery fade, but the definitive sound of circuitry being deliberately overloaded. Its red LED vanished completely. When I examined the device, the memory card was missing, and the battery compartment felt warm, as if someone had accessed it during the blackout, working in darkness with the confidence of familiarity. The micro recorder survived, protected by internal battery. Reviewing the overnight file made my pulse spike. At 2:13 a.m., a whisper from beside my bed, close enough to capture every consonant. Same curve. Male voice, careful, speaking my own words back. The phrase from the notebook describing my kitchen table navigation. Someone had stood next to my bed while I slept, close enough to touch, reading my movements like scripture. The baby powder told its story in negative space. A wedge of bare floor near the door, perfectly clean, as if the door had opened 6 inches without anyone stepping through. Professional restraint or professional caution. Enough gap to slip an arm inside, test locks, place objects, but not enough to commit to full entry. The disturbance pattern suggested someone who understood the difference between surveillance and invasion. I found the painted-over crawlspace hatch while searching for the ceiling leak's source. Hidden behind my bookshelf, covered with layers of white paint applied to conceal rather than protect. Fresh scrape marks broke the paint seal around the edges. When I pressed against it, the hatch moved slightly, exhaling cold air that carried that familiar metallic scent, mixed with fiberglass dust and the smell of stored rain. Prying it open required a putty knife and considerable force. Paint cracked like old skin, revealing a rectangular opening large enough for human passage. My phone's flashlight caught metal gleaming in the darkness, ductwork pipes, and what looked like fiber optic cables running parallel to the building's main systems. Fresh disturbances in the dust showed regular traffic, a clear path worn by someone who used this route as their private highway through the building's hidden infrastructure. I mapped the opening with string and whispered measurements, trying to calm my racing pulse with procedural routine. The crawl space connected to mechanical systems, running parallel to occupied apartment walls. From this hidden network, someone could access any unit's utilities, monitor conversations through thin barriers, and move through the building without using official corridors or elevators. The architectural inconsistencies I documented weren't flaws. They were features designed to accommodate surveillance infrastructure existing between legitimate spaces. The notebook's final entries chilled me most. Subject maintains consistent sleep position, left side facing door. Breathing pattern changes at 2:13 a.m. Awareness without waking. Recommend continued observation to establish full behavioral baseline. I wasn't just being watched. I was being studied with scientific methodology. My unconscious responses cataloged for purposes I couldn't comprehend. I sealed the hatch with duct tape and repositioned the bookshelf. But the damage to my security was permanent. My apartment wasn't sanctuary, it was terrarium, observed from angles I'd never considered. The walls that should have protected me were transparent to whoever had designed this system. My most private moments had become data points in someone else's research project. The ceramic bowl caught another coded sequence. 3 drops, pause, 2 drops, pause, while I tried to process the scope of invasion. The pattern was definitely intentional now. Messages tapped in industrial fluid that smelled like copper and contained uniform dye traces. Someone was communicating through the leak, sending signals in a language I was learning to fear. From deep within the crawl space, something moved with deliberate weight, slow and patient, until it stopped, directly above my bed and stayed there, breathing with the rain. The crawl space exhaled its own weather when I opened the hatch fully. Cold air that moved against architectural logic, carrying fiberglass dust, old concrete, and that persistent metallic scent I'd learned to associate with surveillance. I lowered myself through the frame with procedural care, phone light clenched between my teeth, measuring each movement like evidence. The ductwork stretched in both directions, a hidden highway running parallel to legitimate spaces, connecting apartments through architecture that didn't appear on any official blueprint. String line off my belt, knots every 6 feet, whispered timestamps for the recorder in my pocket. The crawl space ceiling pressed low enough to force a crawl, but the passage was clearly designed for human traffic. Fresh disturbances in the dust showed regular use. Palm prints where gloved hands had steadied themselves, knee impressions spaced with mechanical consistency, scuff marks pointing toward my apartment's vent system. Someone moved through here with the confidence of ownership, following routes they'd mapped and memorized. Objects announced themselves in careful sequence. First, a roll of maintenance uniforms bound with industrial tape, sizes ranging from small to extra large. Too many variations for a single person, suggesting a rotation of personnel. The fabric matched the gray-blue fibers I'd been collecting, industrial cotton designed for durability and anonymity. Attached to the roll, a laminated card. Observation Team 7, rotation schedule. Not a lone janitor, but coordinated surveillance, institutionalized and organized. A heavy-duty flashlight sat magnetized to a beam, its barrel wrapped with masking tape marked 213 in block letters. The battery compartment was warm, recently used, and the lens showed finger smudges from gloved hands. Beside it, a clear plastic bag containing custom-fitted earplugs labeled with my apartment number in pencil. Not standard foam plugs, but professional-grade silicone, molded to specific ear canal dimensions. Someone had taken measurements, crafted personal equipment for extended observation periods in my proximity. I documented everything with photographs, then continued deeper into the network. Glove prints in the dust, measured consistently. Size 9, narrow width, with distinctive tread patterns, from boots designed for quiet movement on metal surfaces. The stride pattern showed professional discipline, always stopping precisely 6 feet from apartment vents, maintaining operational distance while maximizing audio surveillance capability. These weren't random intrusions, but calculated positioning based on acoustic engineering principles. A single hair caught on a junction box screw head glinted under my light. Too straight for mine, too long for Henderson's. Dyed black with the artificial uniformity of professional hair coloring. I lifted it with tape, another data point in the growing evidence of multiple operatives. Near the main trunk, someone had sketched a master key diagram on cardboard, branches labeled Jan, Mech, MGMT, with my apartment number circled and duplicate key patterns drawn with precise hatch marks, indicating cut depths. The system began its coordinated failure at exactly noon. Smoke detectors on my floor chirped in sequence. Not random battery warnings, but coded communication. 3 short chirps, pause. 2 long chirps, pause, repeat. The same rhythm as the ceiling drip, the flickering lights, the intercom static. When the building's fire alarm test sounded, only our corridor received the signal. The recorded voice announced evacuation procedures that no one followed, a demonstration of localized control over emergency systems. My phone buzzed with a network time correction, forcing 2:13 a.m., despite the early afternoon reality outside. Someone was manipulating cellular infrastructure, creating temporal pockets where their operational schedule superseded official time. The correction came with GPS coordinates that mapped to a location 3 blocks away. Not my actual position, but where the surveillance network wanted me documented as being. Through the vent grate, I observed Henderson enter my apartment with keys that turned without resistance. He moved with practiced choreography, avoiding the baby powder I'd scattered, stepping over the tape lifts I'd placed, navigating my security measures like he'd helped design them. His head tilted at that familiar listening angle while he photographed my documentation, studying my methods, adapting his surveillance to stay ahead of my understanding. The observer, observing the observed, a recursive loop that made my position feel increasingly hopeless. Henderson's work pattern revealed professional training. He examined my forensic evidence collection with technical interest, photographing the graphite dust patterns, collecting fiber samples I'd gathered, documenting my documentation. He wasn't just watching me. He was researching my research, learning how I learned. When he spoke into a small radio, his words carried clearly through the thin barrier. Subject shows increased awareness. Recommend escalation to phase 3. Multiple voices responded from different apartments. Not just Mrs. Chen, but a network of watchers coordinating their observation. The building's intercom crackled with responses from units I'd assumed were empty. Voices discussing my behavioral patterns, sleep schedules, defensive measures. I wasn't just one person being watched. I was a case study being managed by a team. My reactions cataloged and analyzed for purposes I couldn't comprehend. The domestic space I'd thought was sanctuary had been transformed into a laboratory with me as the primary research subject. Deep in the ductwork, metal groaned under deliberate weight. Footsteps approached along the lower run, pausing every 4 beats, then advancing the exact same distance. The sound traveled through the building's hidden arteries, mapping acoustic signatures, learning the resonance patterns of every occupied unit. Whoever walked those passages did so with architectural authority, moving through spaces they designed for exactly this purpose. A light appeared in the darkness ahead, patient and measured, advancing in the same four-beat rhythm that had become the surveillance network's signature. I killed my phone light and pressed against the cold concrete wall, breathing through my mouth to minimize sound. The beam moved closer, stopping at junction boxes, pausing at vents, systematically checking the network's operational status. From my apartment above, Henderson's radio crackled again. Observer 2 in position. Subject located in primary access tunnel. The light ahead of me stopped, its beam steady and waiting. Behind me, through the vent, Henderson remained motionless in my living room, blocking retreat. The ceramic bowl caught its coded sequence. 3 drops, pause, 2 drops. Industrial fluid, carrying messages in a language I was learning to fear. The light moved closer until it stopped behind the vent grate, mirroring Henderson's position on the other side. Trapped between 2 points of observation, I realized the crawl space wasn't a discovery. It was a trap designed to funnel me into a position where the surveillance network could study my reactions under controlled conditions. The breathing I heard matched the rain's rhythm, patient and methodical, as if whoever held the light had synchronized their existence to the building's hidden pulse. I called it in from the safety of my locked apartment, voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The brass key with its red thread lay in an evidence bag beside my phone, along with photographs of the notebook, the crawl space, the surveillance equipment I documented. I used clean language, observed, measured, documented, because panic makes dispatchers dismiss you as unstable. "Officer will be there within 20 minutes, she said, professional and distant. I waited with every lock engaged, the chair wedged against the door, listening to rain harden against windows like a rehearsal drum. Officer Beals arrived with wet sleeves and polite fatigue, his body camera blinking that familiar red LED I'd learned to associate with surveillance rather than protection. He listened without interrupting, asked for precise times, wrote everything in a small notebook that made me want to laugh, as if I hadn't already collected more evidence than he could carry. When we opened the crawl space hatch together, his flashlight revealed empty space. The uniforms, the equipment, the observation team 7 schedules, all vanished like they'd been staged for my discovery and removed for his investigation. "Maintenance corridor," he said, naming the space to make it municipal and safe. He found no forced entry, examined my powder residue and hinge hair with professional thoroughness, but somehow missed the unmarked door entirely. His investigation felt choreographed, timed to arrive after evidence had been sanitized. He suggested I stay with friends, promised increased patrols, and left damp footprints that faded as my heating system kicked in. The red light on his body cam blinked once more at my threshold, then died with a soft, electronic sigh. I found the second key ring because heat carries smells, and the radiator was running slightly warm. Metal heated the dust into that familiar penny tang. I knelt with a magnet on a string, a trick for retrieving dropped screws, and pulled carefully until brass clicked against the magnet. The ring held 3 keys with clean filing marks, tagged with my address, and a second aluminum slug stamped mech. Not janitorial access, but mechanical systems. Panels, risers, valves, the building's hidden arteries that don't appear on tenant packets. Maintenance knocked 30 minutes later, precisely timed for the vulnerable period between official dismissal and private fear. Through the peephole, an ID badge pressed against the glass, laminated and official, complete, with building management logos. He knew my name without introduction. Consulting a work order, documenting a leak complaint I'd never filed. Water damage report from apartment 317, he read. Structural concerns requiring immediate inspection. The paperwork was perfect. Case numbers, technical language, official justification for entry I hadn't authorized. I kept the chain set and watched how he respected it, never pressing or arguing. His coveralls matched the gray-blue fibers I'd been collecting, and his gloves showed the layered combination of nitrile beneath work leather, designed to blur fingerprints while maintaining dexterity. When I refused entry, he glanced toward the unmarked door down the hall, a quick flick of knowledge, then left without leaving footsteps. The building's security system revealed the scope of institutional manipulation. The lobby DVR showed perfect continuity except for surgical gaps from 2:10 to 2:20 a.m. every night. Not random system failures, but precise editing, removing exactly 10 minutes while leaving surrounding footage intact. When I called the manager about the pattern, she chewed gum and made jokes about technology. The system likes to sleep, she said, as if digital surveillance operated on biological rhythms. Officer Beals texted hours later. We'll increase patrols. No follow-up, no signature, just dismissive closure. The patrol car that appeared maintained that familiar two-car length distance. Surveillance disguised as security. Authority had become another layer of observation rather than protection. The ceiling leak broke open during the evening news, water cascading with sudden violence that suggested deliberate release rather than gradual failure. The deluge carried evidence down my wall, fragments of photo paper that stuck near the light switch like messages delivered by industrial rain. I peeled one fragment from the plaster, a corner showing my window blind's third slat, and the unmistakable curve of my shoulder, photographed from an impossible angle. More fragments emerged as water receded. Pieces of surveillance photographs documenting my kitchen navigation, bathroom threshold crossing, unconscious sleep positions. Someone had created an archive of my most private moments. And the leak was evidence disposal, washing away documentation that had served its purpose. The building was flushing its memory through my apartment. I made the decision to lock every lock in sequence. Deadbolt, latch, chain, wedge, chair, and sleep facing the door, because beds were too vulnerable, too far from exits. Security was illusion when watchers held master keys and operated with institutional authority. But ritual provided psychological armor against architectural betrayal. The rain thickened outside, drumming against windows with intensity that seemed synchronized to my elevated stress. In its white noise, I heard voices, not random weather acoustics, but deliberate communication shaped by storm rhythm. My phone vibrated against the wooden chair arm, screen lighting with an alarm I'd never set. You're late. 2:13. Not just time reference anymore, but appointment notification, a scheduled event in someone else's operational calendar that included GPS coordinates mapping my exact position in the chair. Under the furniture, my fingers found something magnetized to the metal frame. Professional listening equipment, warm with electronic activity, battery indicator showing weeks of operational time remaining. The surveillance network had transformed my furniture into observation posts, my apartment into a laboratory where I was both researcher and subject, trapped in studies that would continue whether I participated or not. I followed Officer Beals's suggestion because staying meant accepting the apartment as laboratory and leaving offered the illusion of choice. My overnight bag contained the brass key, photographs of surveillance equipment, and the notebook cataloging my routines. Evidence I couldn't abandon because it was the only proof my reality hadn't shifted entirely into institutional control. The rain had softened to a steady percussion against windows, each drop maintaining that 4-beat rhythm I'd learned to associate with operational coordination. The rideshare arrived precisely on schedule, a gray sedan with rain beading on its windshield, like tears the city couldn't quite shed. I engaged all 3 locks, wedged the chair against the door, and descended to street level where normal municipal rules should have applied. The driver nodded without meeting my eyes in the mirror, his smile holding that professional courtesy I'd learned to distrust. His radio played classical music, or those same 5 notes Mrs. Chen hummed, woven into a larger composition that followed the surveillance network's temporal signature. "Marriott downtown, please," I said, settling into the back seat that smelled faintly of industrial cleaning solution and something metallic I couldn't identify. The route should have been simple. 20 minutes through predictable city geometry, traffic patterns that obeyed normal urban logic. Instead, the GPS traced our movement in an impossible loop that always bent back to the same curve by the river, then returned to my block, then circled my building like a ritual orbit that had been programmed rather than navigated. The driver's windshield wipers squeaked in perfect 2-beat counterpoint to the rain's 4-beat pattern, creating a mechanical duet that followed me into the vehicle like a lullaby designed to calm prey. When I mentioned the repetitive route, he chuckled with practiced understanding. "Construction detours," he explained, gesturing toward orange cones that appeared and disappeared like stage props. "City's been rerouting traffic all month." But the construction zones showed no workers, no machinery, no evidence of actual infrastructure development, just barriers directing us through the same impossible geometry. Each circuit appeared different in the moment. Altered street names, modified traffic patterns, buildings that seemed to shift position between loops. But my phone's route history revealed the truth. Identical paths, time-stamped with that persistent 2:13:17 loops over 40 minutes. Each circuit taking exactly 8 minutes and 37 seconds. We weren't traveling through the city. We were traveling through a simulation of the city, a controlled environment that maintained the appearance of movement while ensuring I remained within predetermined boundaries. My phone's compass spun without settling, needle rotating through all directions as if magnetic north had become a moving target. GPS coordinates froze on my building's address regardless of our actual location. Messages failed to send with error codes I'd never seen. Calls dropped after single rings. And when I attempted to contact Officer Beals, the screen went black for exactly 10 seconds before returning with my wallpaper changed. A photograph of my door taken from the hallway, showing the 3 locks engaged exactly as I'd left them. The city's architecture revealed its deception through systematic repetition. The same neon signs appeared at every major intersection, advertising different businesses, but maintaining identical fonts and color schemes. Traffic lights followed the 4-beat pattern, cycling through their phases in synchronized waves that suggested centralized control rather than random municipal timing. Even other vehicles moved with choreographed precision, maintaining specific distances and lane positions that created corridors for our endless circulation. I demanded to exit at the next intersection, but the driver's smile widened without showing teeth. Henderson's expression, Mrs. Chen's expression, Officer Beals's expression when he dismissed my evidence. "Almost there," he said, taking another turn that led back to my street. The meter continued running, accumulating charges for distance we weren't actually traveling, time we weren't actually using to reach a destination that apparently didn't exist within the city's modified geography. When I grabbed the door handle at a red light, the mechanism wouldn't engage. "Child safety locks," he explained, apologetic and helpful. "Insurance requirements." But the hardware felt different. Not standard automotive equipment, but custom installation designed to prevent passenger exit during specific operational phases. The windows wouldn't lower beyond a 2-inch gap, enough for air circulation, but insufficient for escape or communication with outside authorities. I tried photographing landmarks to establish reference points, but my camera captured different images than what I observed. Street signs showed my building's address. Storefronts displayed surveillance equipment advertisements, and pedestrians all wore the same gray-blue coveralls I'd learned to associate with the observation network. The city had been edited around me, transformed into an extension of my apartment's controlled environment, a larger terrarium where I remained the primary research subject. When I finally accepted the futility and asked to return home, the driver's relief was palpable. The route became direct, logical, following normal street patterns that led efficiently back to my building. The patrol car maintained its familiar 2-car length distance, surveillance disguised as security. Outside my door, a white envelope waited on the mat, not delivered by postal service, but placed with precision timing during my enforced absence. Inside the envelope, a single sheet in block letters. Departure logged, 213, return logged, 213. Circuit completed successfully. Initiate Phase 3, reorientation protocol. The 3 locks I'd engaged before leaving were exactly as I'd set them, but the chain hung loose, unhooked from its bracket, with the careful precision of someone who understood the mechanism's tolerances. My apartment exhaled that metallic scent when I opened the door, and the kettle was heating water I hadn't set to boil. Steam rose from the spout in deliberate puffs. 3 short, 2 long, pause, repeat. The same coded sequence I'd learned to interpret as surveillance communication. In the kitchen, evidence of occupation. A warm mug in the sink. Coffee grounds scattered with the randomness of recent use. And my chair positioned at a slightly different angle to the table. Someone had been living my routine while I'd been trapped in the city's modified geography, maintaining the apartment's operational status during my controlled absence. The micro recorder under my bed blinked its red LED, its memory likely filled with sounds of my apartment being occupied by someone who knew my habits well enough to replicate them. The ceramic bowl still caught its coded drip, but the fluid was clear now, as if the message had been delivered, and the industrial dye flushed from the system. On my kitchen table, the notebook lay open to a new entry, written in those same precise block letters. Subject attempted egress via designated transport route. Return to primary observation zone at 2:13. Behavior consistent with predictive model. Phase 3 authorization confirmed. I checked the window blinds with forensic attention. The third slat was still folded, but a small, perfectly circular hole had been drilled through the glass directly behind the fold. It was small enough to be almost invisible, a precision aperture offering clear, unobstructed view into my apartment. From outside, it would be hidden by the slat's positioning. From inside, it was a tiny, unblinking eye that transformed my window into a sniper scope, aimed inward. My phone buzzed with a new alarm I hadn't set. Reorientation protocol, begin. Welcome to Phase 3. The words glowed with unsettling warmth, a perverse hospitality that suggested the surveillance network was ready to move beyond passive observation into active behavioral modification. The patrol car outside had its engine running, idling patiently in the rain, its red and blue lights painting the wet street in slow, hypnotic pulses that matched the building's 4-beat operational rhythm. I went procedural because Phase 3 demanded scientific countermeasures, and documentation was the only language that might eventually translate into protection. The apartment exhaled that metallic scent when I killed the main breaker, plunging my controlled environment into darkness that felt more honest than the surveillance-tainted light. Without power, their cameras went blind, their listening devices went silent, and for the first time since finding the brass key, I could work without electronic supervision watching my every defensive adaptation. The graphite came out first. Pencil lead ground to forensic dust on a ceramic plate, fine enough to capture ridge patterns from surfaces they'd assumed were clean. I worked systematically, dusting every contact point with the methodical precision of someone who understood that evidence was the only anchor against institutional gaslighting. Doorknobs, window latches, the chain bracket, the brass key with its red thread. Everything that hands touched. Everything that proved human presence in spaces where I was supposed to live alone. The fingerprint lifts told stories in whirls and arches that made my chest tighten. Clear packing tape pressed against powdered surfaces, then transferred to white index cards with timestamps and location notes written in the steady hand of someone refusing panic. The deadbolt showed 3 distinct patterns. Mine, narrow and familiar. Henderson's, wide with the telltale compression marks of work gloves. And a third set, smaller and precise, with ridge characteristics suggesting someone who wore nitrile underneath leather. Professional technique for maintaining dexterity while obscuring identity. I moved to fiber collection with tweezers and small plastic bags, cataloging the gray-blue threads that had accumulated like evidence of slow-motion invasion. Under magnification from a jeweler's loupe, the weave showed industrial construction, cotton polyester blend designed for durability and stain resistance, thread count consistent with maintenance uniforms. But some fibers showed different characteristics, finer weave, different dye lots, suggesting multiple sources, multiple personnel, rotation schedules that matched the Observation Team 7 documentation I'd photographed in the crawlspace. The mech key felt heavy in my palm, its brass surface warm from handling, its red thread dye leaving faint residue on my fingertips. I began a systematic search of utility access points, running my fingers along every seam and panel in the building's common areas, feeling for the subtle give of a lock that didn't belong to standard tenant infrastructure. The rain outside amplified every small sound, each drip a hammer blow against the thin walls of my remaining composure. I found it behind the cleaning supplies in the utility closet. A small, unmarked panel painted the same institutional beige as the walls, but with paint slightly newer than the surrounding surfaces. The mech key slid in like it had been cut specifically for this purpose, turning with a smooth, almost lubricated click. The panel swung open, revealing a compact server rack with multiple indicator lights blinking in that familiar 4-beat pattern, data cables, and what appeared to be a cellular signal booster. This was the heart of the observation network. I photographed everything: serial numbers, wiring configurations, the precise rhythm of the blinking lights. On a small embedded screen, green text scrolled rapidly: my own routines, my recent movements, temperature fluctuations in my apartment, all displayed in real time and time-stamped with 213. The domestic inversion was complete. My home wasn't just watched but processed, analyzed, and controlled by this hidden architecture that had been installed during construction, not retrofitted after occupancy. The micro recorder under my bed contained material that made my pulse spike when I reviewed it in the utility closet's cramped space. Multiple voices discussing my behavioral patterns, sleep schedules, defensive adaptations. Not random conversation, but structured debriefing, professional analysis of subject responses to controlled stimuli. Phase 2 completed successfully, Henderson's voice reported with clinical satisfaction. Subject shows increased awareness, but remains within predictable parameters. Recommend escalation to active intervention. Mrs. Chen's voice responded from what sounded like her apartment next door. Acoustic monitoring confirms stress indicators within acceptable ranges. No signs of complete psychological breakdown. Subject maintains investigative behavior patterns. They were managing my sanity as carefully as they monitored my routines, calibrating psychological pressure to maintain functionality while advancing their research objectives. But the most disturbing element was my own voice, stolen and looped, whispering my documented phrases back like catechism. Same curve, same hour, third slat, chain loose. Someone had recorded my unconscious verbal habits, my private self-soothing rituals, and weaponized them into behavioral conditioning tools. The voices layered and distorted, creating a subliminal soundtrack designed to reinforce the very patterns they were studying. A chilling realization crystallized as I examined the server's configuration. The mech key I'd thought was my advantage, the one that had led me to this discovery, was itself part of their system. It was designed to be found, designed to lead me here, to make me believe I was uncovering their secrets when I was merely interacting with another layer of their controlled environment. My investigation wasn't resistance. It was protocol. My forensic methods were feeding data into their behavioral analysis, my defensive adaptations becoming new parameters in their research model. The graphite dust on my doorknob showed a new pattern when I returned to check. Not a partial print, but a full palm impression, as if someone had pressed their hand against the door not to open it, but to feel it, to measure the vibrations of my movements inside. The ridge patterns were blurred by specialized material suggesting gel-filled gloves designed to absorb rather than transfer evidence while maintaining tactile sensitivity. From my apartment, I heard the gentle, precise sound of my deadbolt engaging, not the sound of someone trying to break in, but someone already inside, turning the lock from the interior, as if to secure the space for themselves. My chain lifted and fell once, twice, testing weight and resistance with the methodical patience of someone documenting mechanical tolerances for future operational requirements. The server's hum seemed to vibrate through the building's bones, and in its electronic whisper, I heard the sound of institutional patience, systematic methodology, and the quiet satisfaction of researchers whose subject had achieved the exact level of awareness necessary for Phase 3 implementation. The rain continued its 4-beat pattern against windows that no longer offered privacy, each drop marking time, in a rhythm that belonged to someone else's schedule. I sealed the utility panel and returned to my dark apartment, where the ceramic bowl continued catching its coded drip, and the micro recorder blinked its red LED like a mechanical heartbeat. On my kitchen table, the notebook had grown new entries written in darkness, with the confidence of someone who knew my apartment's geography perfectly. Subject demonstrates advanced forensic awareness. Evidence collection methods exceed civilian baseline. Investigation behavior now integrated into Phase 3 parameters. The gentle rotation of keys echoed in the hallway with patient precision, and I understood that every lock I'd tested, every security measure I'd implemented, every piece of evidence I'd collected had been observed, analyzed, and incorporated into a behavioral model that predicted my responses with scientific accuracy. I lay down on the floor by the door instead of the bed, eyes fixed on the chain that lifted and fell in mechanical rhythm, counting beats with the rain that no longer sounded like weather, but like the steady pulse of an institutional heart that had been beating long before I arrived and would continue long after I learned to stop listening. The deadbolt engaged from inside my apartment with a soft, final click that resonated through the building's bones like a verdict being rendered. I remained motionless on the cold floor, pressed against the wall, watching my chain lift once, then fall. A methodical testing of weight and resistance from someone who had finally transitioned from observer to occupant. The metallic scent I'd learned to associate with surveillance equipment now carried the warmth of human presence, someone making themselves at home in my carefully documented routines. The rain outside maintained its 4-beat pattern against windows that no longer offered privacy, each drop marking operational time in a rhythm that belonged to institutional schedules rather than weather patterns. From my kitchen came the familiar whistle of my kettle, water I hadn't set to boil, steam rising in deliberate puffs that matched the coded sequences I'd learned to interpret as surveillance communication. Someone was performing my life with the confidence of ownership, acting out my habits as proof of their mastery over my existence. I moved toward the source because documentation had taught me that evidence lived in infrastructure, not symptoms. The server rack in the utility closet hummed with increased activity, processing data streams that included my current position, my elevated stress indicators, my predictable defensive responses. The mech key felt warm in my pocket, its brass surface heated by handling, its red thread a navigation marker leading me deeper into the building's hidden architecture. The unmarked renovation door near the service closet had been waiting for this moment, this inevitable convergence when passive observation required active intervention. The brass key from my doormat turned with pneumatic smoothness, revealing not storage but a stairwell descending into sub-basement levels that shouldn't exist according to official building plans. Professional installation, sound dampening foam lining the walls, emergency lighting that cast everything in amber shadows, industrial carpet designed to muffle footsteps with operational efficiency. The air grew colder as I descended, carrying scents of concrete dust, machine oil, and that persistent metallic tang concentrated enough to taste. This wasn't makeshift surveillance, but permanent infrastructure, built with municipal permits and contractor expertise during initial construction, integrated into the building's foundation like a circulatory system designed to process human behavior into institutional data. At the bottom, a viewing room announced itself through the blue glow of multiple monitors bleeding light under a door marked with a small placard. Observation Station 7. The same number from the uniform rotation schedule, confirming my apartment as primary research focus within a larger network of controlled residential environments. I photographed the placard before entering, documenting evidence with the methodical precision of someone who understood that survival required proof. Inside, plastic sheeting covered every surface. Not construction protection, but contamination control, designed to prevent evidence transfer between observation team and subject environment. Multiple monitors displayed my apartment from angles I'd never imagined possible. Overhead views from ceiling fixtures, wall-mounted perspectives from electrical outlets, even clear shots of my bed from cameras embedded within the headboard itself. The domestic inversion was complete. Every private moment had been public performance, every intimate gesture cataloged for behavioral analysis. The equipment was professional-grade institutional surveillance technology, with serial numbers suggesting government or corporate procurement. Red LEDs blinked in synchronized 4-beat patterns across server racks, data storage systems, and communication equipment capable of coordinating multiple observation sites simultaneously. This wasn't just about my apartment. It was systematic behavioral research conducted on residential populations, with my building serving as one experimental node in a larger institutional network. On the main desk, a ledger lay open to pages documenting my routines with scientific precision. Sleep patterns, bathroom schedules, eating habits, unconscious behaviors like facial touching and pacing patterns. Margin notes referenced baseline establishment, stimulus introduction, and behavioral modification protocols, clinical language that transformed my daily life into experimental data. Tomorrow's entry showed my name written twice beside 213, as if I were scheduled to exist in two places simultaneously. The photograph archive contained thousands of images organized by category and timestamp, sleep positions, kitchen navigation patterns, bathroom routines, unconscious facial expressions, during moments I'd assumed were unobserved. Labels referenced psychological assessment criteria, behavioral prediction models, and Phase 3 implementation guidelines that transformed my resistance into research parameters. Henderson entered with the practiced choreography of someone who'd been waiting for this encounter, his reflection arriving first on dark monitors before his physical presence filled the doorway. He avoided every camera sightline like muscle memory, crossing observation cones only at their edges, moving through the surveillance network with the confidence of its architect. His smile showed no teeth, just that polite curve that never reached his eyes. "False cover is complete," he said softly, consulting the ledger as if confirming an appointment. "Residents prefer maintenance to surveillance. Polite fabrics. Keys that sound like help." He set a second ledger beside the first, identical except for annotations that included my forensic methods, my counter-surveillance techniques, even the way I labeled evidence. My resistance had been fully integrated into their operational model, another data stream feeding their behavioral analysis. The room's lights dimmed without flicker, monitors dying to uniform black as the system initiated controlled shutdown. Not equipment failure, but protocol activation. Someone cutting my access the moment I'd achieved full awareness of their operational capability. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red, and in that crimson illumination, footsteps approached from the corridor with measured precision. A flashlight beam found my chest and paused, the light steady and professional, held by someone who'd been monitoring this moment through multiple data streams. From beyond the beam, a voice spoke my name with careful pronunciation, each syllable enunciated for recording equipment that would document this encounter as another data point in their comprehensive behavioral study. Phase 3 requires direct subject interaction, Henderson explained, his tone carrying the professional courtesy of a researcher addressing a laboratory specimen. Your investigative behavior has exceeded baseline parameters. Time for active behavioral modification. The beam shifted to illuminate the ledger, to a page labeled with tomorrow's date containing my name under 2 columns, subject and integration protocol. Behind him, more footsteps approached with coordinated timing. Mrs. Chen's measured pace, Officer Beals's authoritative stride, voices from apartments I'd assumed were empty. The observation network was converging on their primary research subject, multiple personnel coordinating through communication systems that had been processing my existence into institutional data since the moment I'd signed my lease. The viewing room had been designed for this convergence, this inevitable moment when passive research required active management, when behavioral observation transitioned into direct control. The plastic sheeting wasn't just contamination prevention, it was preparation for evidence disposal, for the systematic processing of a research subject who had learned too much about the infrastructure studying him. From the corridor beyond Henderson, radio static crackled with familiar voices discussing operational parameters, behavioral modification protocols, and integration schedules that would transform my documented routines into institutional property. The red emergency lighting pulsed in that familiar 4-beat pattern, and in its rhythm, I heard the sound of Phase 3 beginning. The moment when surveillance became something far more permanent than observation. The voice from beyond the flashlight beam carried my own cadence, my own careful pronunciation, but spoke words I'd never authorized in sequences that made my chest tighten with recognition. Integration protocol confirmed. My stolen voice announced through speakers embedded in the viewing room walls. Subject behavioral analysis complete. Initiate replacement sequence. The beam remained steady on my chest, while my own voice discussed my elimination with clinical precision, as if I were attending my own case review conducted by institutional committee. Henderson stepped aside with practiced choreography, and in the red emergency lighting's wash, the person holding the flashlight revealed themselves. My height, my build, my clothes from the building's laundry rotation, even the small coffee stain on the left sleeve I'd acquired yesterday morning. The face was mine, but perfected somehow. Expressions too controlled, movements too efficient, like someone had studied my unconscious gestures and eliminated the inefficiencies that marked me as authentically human. Replacement protocol represents the logical conclusion of comprehensive behavioral documentation, Henderson explained. consulting his ledger with professional satisfaction. Original specimens demonstrate excessive investigative awareness. Replacement units maintain residential occupancy while serving institutional objectives with appropriate compliance parameters. My duplicate moved through the viewing room with my gait, but improved, stepping precisely in camera blind spots, avoiding surfaces that would capture fingerprints, performing my existence without the defensive adaptations that had marked me as problematic. The institutional scope crystallized with horrifying clarity. The building wasn't residential housing, but a processing facility, each apartment containing subjects being documented for eventual replacement by operatives who could perform their lives with systematic efficiency. The observation network didn't just study behavior, it harvested and replicated it, creating improved versions of residents who would maintain lease agreements and municipal records while serving purposes I couldn't comprehend. Mrs. Chen entered with her familiar 5-note humming, but her movements showed the same systematic improvement, the same elimination of human inefficiency that marked my replacement. Acoustic analysis confirms original subject stress patterns remained within acceptable parameters throughout documentation phases, she reported in her own voice, but with Henderson's clinical vocabulary. Replacement integration should proceed without residential disruption to neighboring units. Officer Beals appeared with his body camera blinking that familiar red LED, but his professional fatigue had been replaced by mechanical alertness. Legal documentation prepared. Missing person report will be filed after standard delay period. Investigation will conclude with residential abandonment finding. They had perfected the bureaucratic machinery of disappearance, transforming institutional murder into administrative procedure that would satisfy municipal oversight requirements. My replacement spoke in my voice, but with Henderson's institutional courtesy. Original specimen demonstrated advanced forensic awareness exceeding civilian baseline parameters. Replacement model has been programmed with appropriate investigative limitations while maintaining subjects' established routine authenticity. They touched surfaces I would have avoided, stood in camera angles I would have dodged, performing my documented existence without the paranoid adaptations that had made me unsuitable for continued residential occupancy. The monitors displayed my apartment in real time, my replacement already there, following my documented routines with mechanical precision. They moved the same curve around my table, checked the chain lock twice, folded the blinds to the third slat with movements that were mine but too perfect, lacking the unconscious variations that made behavior authentically human. Someone was living my life better than I had, armed with institutional analysis of my most private moments. I found the valve, because desperation sharpens perception. And the sprinkler system's main line ran along the ceiling like an arterial network designed for emergency activation. The industrial release mechanism felt cold under my palm as I positioned myself against it, calculating the chaos necessary to disrupt their careful choreography. Water erupted with violent pressure when I triggered the manual override, mixing institutional water with storm water, flooding the viewing room with enough disruption to crash their electronic surveillance. Monitors died with electronic screams. Servers sparked and failed under the deluge, and in the sudden darkness I heard my replacement curse with my voice. But Henderson's professional vocabulary. Water cascaded over plastic sheeting, washing away contamination barriers, and revealing messages painted beneath the protective covering. White paint bled under the flood, exposing words layered on concrete walls. We keep the curve. 213 is a door, and tally marks under names. Dozens of names representing residents who had been processed before me. The basement filled with institutional water that carried away institutional secrets, and in its chaos, I found the emergency exit that led to surface streets, where normal municipal rules might still apply. Behind me, my replacement's voice called my name with perfect pronunciation, but the inflection was wrong, too careful, lacking the unconscious stress patterns that made speech authentically mine. I ran through corridors that felt architecturally compressed, my footsteps echoing in rhythms I didn't recognize, climbing stairs that led to ground level where the city maintained its systematic repetition. Same neon signs, same traffic timing, same architectural patterns. The entire municipal environment had been modified to support residential processing, creating a closed system where subjects could be contained, studied, and replaced without external detection. The storage loft I found 2 buildings away smelled like abandonment rather than surveillance. Dust and old rain instead of metallic monitoring equipment. I built new routines from institutional paranoia, multiple locks, aluminum foil over windows to block electronic surveillance, furniture positioned to avoid sight lines, kettle unplugged to prevent remote activation. My replacement would be performing my documented life in my documented apartment while I learned to exist in the gaps between their operational parameters. But the brass key remained in my pocket, its red thread now faded from handling, its weight a constant reminder that institutional infrastructure had been designed to accommodate subjects who achieved exactly my level of awareness. Every lock I'd tested, every security measure I'd implemented, every piece of evidence I'd collected had been designed to bring me to that viewing room at precisely the right moment for replacement protocol activation. From my hiding place, I watched the city's systematic repetition with the clarity of someone who had escaped one laboratory only to discover a larger one. The patrol cars maintained their surveillance distances, but now I understood they were documenting my post-replacement behavior, cataloging my adaptive responses for integration into future subject management protocols. The unresolved tell announced itself through weight and texture, a new addition to my key ring that I'd never attached. A small brass button, military surplus style, with a 4-beat pattern etched into its surface so finely it felt like braille. Beneath the pattern, numbers, 213. It had appeared during my escape, placed with the precision of someone who understood that subjects achieving replacement awareness would require new levels of institutional management. The button warmed against my fingers like living metal, and in its weight I heard the promise that even escape was simply another phase in their systematic study of human behavior under institutional pressure. The building's lights pulsed in that familiar 4-beat pattern, and in their rhythm, I recognized the sound of Phase 4 beginning. Whatever came after replacement, whatever happened to subjects who learned to live in the spaces between surveillance and freedom, carrying institutional markers that would never stop ticking in their pockets like mechanical hearts counting time in someone else's schedule.